Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Okay, now I would like to introduce our Alanon Luncheon speaker. It's my privilege to introduce Jean A. from Riverside.
Thank you, Jennifer and Tay and the committee. Actually, the committee in my head thanks the committee because you've kept it very busy all weekend. I don't know about the rest of you, but when somebody tells me I have to talk about myself, that's all I can think about, and I don't really like to do that. But it's such a gift to be asked to speak to a group of Alanons because it forces me to remember what it was like, because I don't like to do that. I don't like to think about things that aren't pleasant, and that's part of the reason that I ended up getting here. We share our story, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, but, I really have to start with what happened, because when I got here, if you had asked me a month before I got here if everything was fine in my life, I would have said, absolutely, everything's fine. My husband's fine, my marriage is fine, my daughter is fine, everything was fine. And it really wasn't. And what got me here, what broke through that denial, was my husband decided to let me know that he had found someone that he thought complimented him better than me. She liked to do drugs and drink with him, and I didn't. And so he told me he thought he was going to leave me and go be with her. And, all of a sudden, my life wasn't fine anymore. In fact, it was really magnificently unfine. And, I don't know why, but I think I was just in such shock when he told me that I just said to him, well, that's fine. If you want to do that, one more fine. That's fine. If that's what you want to do, you go ahead and do it. But, let's remember the good times we had. And so we started talking, and he talked all night. We talked all night, I guess, about all the good times we'd had. Now, you need to know that my husband is an alcoholic. He used a lot of drugs to keep drinking. That was a means to an end, so he could keep on drinking. And when I say he talked all night, I really mean it, which should give you a clue as to which drugs he was using to keep on drinking that I didn't even know. Now, I also need to tell you that a month before he told me about this girlfriend of his, my daughter had been home from her college back on the East Coast, and she had said, Mom, do you think Dad does drugs? I said, absolutely not. Your dad would never do drugs, And there he was, telling me that he did have a problem with drugs. He did, he didn't say he had a problem. He just said he enjoyed them. He enjoyed the alcohol, and he enjoyed this new girlfriend. Well, the next day he told me that he decided he would go ahead and stay with me. But what he didn't tell me was that he was going to stay with me, but he was going to have that girlfriend on the side too. And it didn't take me long to figure out that he was taking these unexplained trips away from the house. He'd say, I'm going out for some cigarettes and come back a day later. Or he would say, I'll be home in a half an hour and come home 3 hours later. The type of things that he was doing all of a sudden became clear. Now, I went and talked to my friend because I was so angry. All of a sudden, I was just, filled with this rage at what was going on in my life. And I went and visited my friend who's also a financial planner, and I said, I am so angry, I am going to kill him. And I meant it. And I had been laying awake at night thinking of the way that I was going to dispatch him, because I knew that he was worth more to me dead than divorced. His insurance policies would give me more than what I could get if I divorced him. And it was just a matter of figuring out the right method. And my friend told me what to do. She said, make sure that you've got the passwords to your financial accounts, make sure you've got this, make sure you've got that, put it all in a safe place. And then she said, I think you need to call your employee assistance plan, because murder is probably not the best way to go in this situation. So I called the employee assistance plan, and, thank God for the people at the other end of the phone line, because they were asking me questions like, well, what does he do that is unusual, or what is it that he does that you're concerned about? And, I couldn't even tell them what was unusual, because it was also usual to me at that point. And I was in such a state of denial that it all just seemed normal to me. So they put me in contact with a lady who was an interventionist, and she told me to keep a notebook and write down anything that I thought might be something that a normal person wouldn't do. And she explained to me that when I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I could not continue in the way that we were continuing, then we would do an intervention and try to get him some help. And I knew that there was something wrong at some level. I just didn't know what it really was. So I started taking notes like crazy about anything that I saw that wasn't a typical kind, that I thought maybe wasn't typical. But to me, coming into this disease is kind of like when you put a frog in cold water and turn on the heat. The frog doesn't even know that it's getting warmer and warmer until it's boiled to death, and that was what was happening to me. We'd been married for 25 years when this happened, and, we had grown up together. We were married when we were only 22, and when we were first married, I was sure that we were just the perfect match. Both of us had lost our parent when we were young. We both kind of liked the same things. He was just funny. He was cute. He thought I was great. What more can you ask out of a relationship, right? We drank together for a lot of years until it just didn't do any good for me. I got to the point where when my teeth would start to feel numb, I would stop drinking and I would switch to water, and he just kept on. But it never got into my head how bad it had gotten until I started keeping those notes. And these are some of the things that I noticed as I was starting to take these notes, and that is that sometimes he would never go to bed. He would keep on working down in his garage or out in the yard until like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then he would finally collapse and sleep for a really long time. And I figured, I don't remember him doing that before. Maybe that's something that I need to write down, things like that. Now, I also thought that this lady told me to have his business partner also keep a little notebook. And so I called his business partner and I said, we think that Joe may be having a problem with drugs and alcohol, so if you would keep this notebook, then when we're ready, we will do this intervention. So his business partner says, okay, sure. And he starts keeping his little notebook of what Joe's doing that may not be normal. Things like going out to lunch at 10 in the morning and not bothering to come back at all was probably affecting his business. So this happened in December, and by February, I had been racing around town doing all of the don'ts, with my little notebook. I'd follow him around. I'd go to the bars. I'd try to find him. His secretary saved his cell phone bills for me so I could track to see who he was calling. And I was able to monitor the fact that he was continuing to call this girlfriend. I was also spying kind of on the girlfriend. Her children happened to go to the school where I was the assistant principal, so I was monitoring their behavior as well. And, it was just crazy. It was crazy. I wish I could just show you a picture of us at that time. I actually have a picture of my daughter, my husband, and I over Christmas break. We went down through Tijuana because we were going down to Baja California to stay with his aunt and uncle. And so in those little restaurants there, they come around and take your picture. And, there was me. I weighed 70 pounds more than I do now. So I'm sitting there, great big smile on my little chubby cheeks, And my husband is, he had just bought another couple big jars of drugs at one of the pharmacies down there where you can go and buy drugs without a prescription. And he's sitting there looking really pissed off because that was his typical expression in those days. He was not an angry drunk. He was an angry sober. He was happy when he was drunk and on drugs. He was pissed off when he was sober. So he's sitting there in this picture going, just angry or tense, little knotted jaws because his cheeks, he gritted his cheeks, so much. He was always, so he's got this, gritted jaw. And there's my daughter just, skinny and just looking kind of lost, We were like this lost family, and I couldn't even see it. I didn't even know that there was a problem in my home. So I got to this point where I knew that I could no longer live in this situation. And I knew that I was willing to give up everything in order to bring it to an end. And So I called the intervention lady and we set up the date for the intervention. We decided to just do it right in his office. And so the day of the intervention came. I had his uncle meet me there. His partner was there. The secretary was there. And I showed up with a canvas bag. And in that canvas bag, I had, because I'm prepared, I'm an Alanon. I take care of those details. I don't leave anything up to chance. I had an appointment with an attorney that afternoon to start divorce proceedings and to bring closure to this marriage. I had the paperwork all drawn up to put our house on the market and to sell it. I had the telephone number of the police officer in Riverside who dealt with drugs. And he knew me. He knew I was going to call. I told him, if he doesn't do this, I'm going to call you, and I will turn over these drugs to you, and you can arrest him for possession of drugs. And I had everything covered with a little tea towel because I didn't want people to see me walking through the streets carrying all this massive amounts of things. I knew at that point that I was going to lose him one way or the other. I knew that either he was going to go into recovery, he was going to commit suicide, or he was going to go to jail, because I knew at that level that he was so depressed that I really didn't think he was going to live, and I was going to do one last ditch effort to save his sorry ass, and that was just the way I looked at that. Sorry, sweetheart. All right. So, I've been collecting these notebooks full of all this stuff, that he had been doing, and I had my notebooks in that thing. And we walked into the intervention, and the interventionist lady sat down, and she said, "Do you know why we are here?" And he said, "No." And she said, "We are here because your family and friends are concerned about you." And she said, "We're going to have each of them tell you how your drinking has affected them." And she started going around the table. And, she didn't even get to me. And he said, "Okay, I'll go." I was so disappointed. I had all this stuff I wanted to tell him. I had notebooks full of stuff, of all the stuff he had been doing. And I didn't even get to share that. And he just said, "Okay, I'll go." So we already had an appointment made with the Behavioral Medical Center in Redlands. And so we put him in the car and we drove him over there. And on the way to the hospital, I said to him, "Gosh, do you have anything you feel like you need to say or anything?" And he says, "Yeah, what took you so long?" Can you believe the nerve of that guy? What took you so long? I mean, I don't know. I was just waiting I don't know what I was doing. It really isn't. Denial is just such a huge part of my story that I could have gone that many years and not seen what was in front of my face. But, in a way, it's not that different. Because when you marry a person, when I married a person who was not emotionally available, it allowed me to also be emotionally not available. His focus on himself allowed me a lot of freedom in that marriage. Because he was independent, I was able to be independent. That was good for me. My mother told me when I got married, she said, "Jean, the way to keep a husband is the same way you keep a butterfly as a pet." And I said, "Oh, yeah?" And she said, "Yeah, like this." And so, I got that lesson. Of course, now I have to tell you, she was on her third marriage when she told me this. So, I went into my marriage with an open hand. I was not going to crush that guy. He could do his thing. And that also gave me a lot of independence, too. But what it had created was a real entwined relationship with my daughter. Because while he was out doing his thing, and my daughter and I became a real unit, and that was probably not a real healthy relationship for her, because we were like a plate of spaghetti when I got here. You couldn't tell where she began and I began. We were kind of enmeshed emotionally, so that was a real tough part. But, we drove him over to that treatment center, and they started working the miracle of recovery on the two of us. And, they got him in there. They were taking his little blood pressure. He was chatting up those nurses and flirting away. And they started asking me questions, how are you doing? What are you doing? I could not even respond. All I could tell them at that place was about Joe. And all I could talk about was Joe. All I could say was, Joe won't like it if this is a God program. He doesn't have that much religion. Joe won't like it if you put him with another person. He isn't going to like rooming with another person. And they were saying, well, what about you? Finally, one of the guys said to me, Jean, what is your favorite color? I said, I don't really have a favorite color, but Joe's favorite color is green. And I thought I was healthy when I left that treatment center, I'm the one who took his wallet and his car keys and drove home. I thought that I was the healthy one because I was going home and he was staying in that treatment center. But you know what the real truth of the matter is that as soon as he stopped drinking, as soon as he stopped putting drugs and alcohol in his system, he started getting better. But the thing is that what had been keeping me safe all those years wasn't drugs or alcohol. What had been separating me from reality wasn't a drug that I could take out of my system. It was my brain, and my brain was still with me. And it was pretty in bad shape by the time I got here because I couldn't even tell you what was real and what wasn't. And today I understand that reality is really a matter of perception. There really is no reality out there. And if you don't believe me, ask 2 children that grew up in the same household to describe their experience. And it will sound like they grew up in 2 different households, because reality is just what happens between our ears. So, you know, the only way I was able to work my way back to reality, the way I was able to work myself back to a semblance of mental health, I hope I have today, was by working the 12 steps. And I was fortunate. I decided that since my husband had gotten sick in our community, that I could get healthy in our community. So I started going to Alanon meetings in Riverside where we lived, and just didn't worry about the whole anonymity thing. And, you know, I didn't have anything to worry about anyway, because, to tell you the truth, I think everybody who cared in Riverside already knew that there was a problem, and they were so glad to see me walk through those doors of Alanon. And I had one friend who was there in the first meeting I went to, and I didn't even know she was in Alanon. She said, "Thank God you are here." And I started going to one meeting that was a discussion meeting, and another meeting that was a 12-step meeting. Started working those 12 steps, and that was what really, really helped me. The first step, knowing that I was powerless over alcohol. You know, when I drove away from the treatment center, I thought that I didn't think that it applied to me. I thought he was powerless over alcohol, that I was not. But, you know, the day that I went to take him home from the treatment center, when I gave him back that wallet and I gave him back those keys, that was the day I understood why I was powerless over alcohol. Because I knew that with his keys back, with his wallet back, that he could go to any liquor store and get alcohol. If alcohol was calling to him, and that call of alcohol was stronger than the call of AA, that he would be back to drinking again, and I was powerless over the call of alcohol to another person. Now, I also came to understand how many things in my life I was powerless over. You know, a year after he had gotten into sobriety, I told you my daughter was in college back east, and she got sent home from college with an eating disorder. Now, I need to tell you that it doesn't matter. In our Alanon literature, it says that there is nothing more painful than watching someone you love slowly kill themselves with alcohol. Well, I believe that there's nothing more painful than watching someone slowly kill themselves with anything. And it doesn't matter what that thing is. And with my daughter, it was an eating disorder. And she was sent home at about 90 pounds. She's the same height I am, about 5'7". And she had been seeing a psychiatrist at her college, and they couldn't get her to eat, and they couldn't get her to even see she had a problem. She still thought she was fat, and so they sent her home, and we didn't really know if she was physically even going to make it when she first came home, because she was not in good physical condition. And I realized that I'm powerless over another person. You know, I couldn't make her eat. I couldn't make her stop from throwing up. And what I could tell her was, I don't want to smell it in my house. I don't want to see evidence of the binging in my house. But that was about it. That was all I could do. And I remember one night laying in bed and realizing that there was a chance that my daughter would die, and that there was nothing I could do to save her life, that she was the only person who could save her life, that I couldn't. And at that time, you know, I really released her to a higher power. You know, I released her with love, and knew, you know, I just kind of envisioned her in a higher power's hands, and let her go. And the amazing thing of that was, it was at that moment, I mean, it was like in the next few days, that she found a counselor to help her with her eating disorder, that she started to get better, that she started to take responsibility for her own life. And I never said anything to her. I never said, "It's now up to you, I've released you." It was just one of those things that just happened. I found out I'm powerless over my past about a year after that. I guess things just happened to me in February, not one of my favorite months anymore, but a year after that, I got a telephone call from from someone who said, was your name Jean Marshall? And I said, yes, it was. They said, did you give up a baby for adoption in 1965 in Minneapolis? And I said, yes, I did. And they said, well, that baby that you gave up for adoption would like to contact you. And I said, well, that's good. That's fine. What are you going to say? No, I don't want to hear from them. You know, but fortunately I'd mentioned something about it to my husband, that there was this baby out there that I had given birth to when I was a senior in high school, or right between. Actually, what happened was, it was actually very good timing, as these things go. You know, I got pregnant in my senior year of high school. I was able to disguise it, you know, by girdles. We had girdles back then. Poor girls today, I don't know what they would do, but we had girdles. I was able to manage to graduate from high school, went into Minneapolis, lived in a place for where girls, they used to have rooming houses for girls, and this was a rooming house for girls, and I was able to lie my way into there saying that I had this husband that was off in the military or something, and that I was just there temporarily. So I stayed there. I worked as a telephone solicitor, and then drove myself to the hospital, gave birth, and drove myself back home, and 2 weeks later started college. So I managed to, I thought I'd gotten away with it. You know, that's what we like, you know, get away with it, right? But now my past was coming to, this was my big secret. I didn't tell anybody about it. Didn't tell anybody through college, hadn't talked about it with anybody in my hometown. My family never talked about it. Nobody talked about it. It was a big secret. And now my secret was back right in my face. And my husband took the news very well. You know, he had 2 years now in AA, and it was quite a shock to my daughter to learn she had a sibling. And so anyway, this girl came back in my life, and she's a lovely girl. I don't get to see her too much. You know, she has her adoptive mom who is her mom. I don't try to be a mom to her. That's not my role in her life. But, you know, I'm certainly there if she has any questions about her past or anything else. I found out about a year later that I'm also powerless over my body. And that's something that as you grow older you really come to grips with, I guess. But what happened was I woke up one day and I was dizzy and I couldn't hear out of my ear, one of my right ear. And, you know, I'm an Alanon, and I'm not that recovered. So I went to work anyway because I had a meeting I had to run. Went to work, finally went to the doctor. There was nothing they could do about it. I permanently lost the hearing in my ear. They don't, you know, it was like I don't know why. I still don't understand it. But I don't have hearing in this ear. But, you know, one of the character defects that I had asked my higher power to remove was the propensity to gossip. And you know, my higher power took care of it for me. You know, I lost the hearing in this ear, and I'll tell you, with only one ear, you can't participate in gossip. Because everyone naturally lowers their voice when they're going to tell you something that's gossipy. I don't know why. I think it's like no one else can hear. Even if there's only 2 people in the whole room, they'll start talking real soft if they want to tell you something that's kind of gossipy. And I just can't hear. So I've learned just as I smile, I nod, oh, interesting. And I just go on with my day because, you know, it's really relieved me of that compulsion to talk about other people. So anyway, that was how I learned I was powerless. Now, came to believe in a higher power. That was a little tough for me. You know, my dad had committed suicide when I was 13. And we had walked on eggshells for a long time around him once we realized that he was not in the best mental health. And then he finally committed suicide. And so when people talk about a higher power, they're usually talking about a male higher power. And I had trouble with that. I had trouble with Our Father. I still have trouble saying the Our Father prayer because I did not have a good concept of a father. My dad was very uninvolved with his children. He kept waiting for us to grow up so he could have a conversation with us. And, you know, we didn't grow up before he committed suicide. So I never really had a father that I ever had a conversation with. And so to me, thinking of a higher power that's a father figure is thinking of someone who's not involved, who leaves you alone, who leaves you on your own, who leaves you to fend for yourself, who leaves you to figure out life. And so it wasn't a real comfortable thing. The other thing is I'm still a product of the 60s, and I believed in, that was when they talked about religion being the opiate of the masses. And I didn't want to be a mass, I was unique. And so I didn't believe in a higher power, I didn't believe in religion. I didn't believe in that male concept. My husband was nothing to really worship either, so that male concept just wasn't there. And what I did was I finally got to the point in this program where I didn't have to believe in a higher power. All I had to believe was that I was not it, that there was something out there in the world that affected my life that wasn't me, that would take care of me, that would take care of my life. Fate is as good as I can come to the concept of a higher power. It happens. It just happens. It happens. But what I have learned is that there's a powerful force in the universe that's a very positive, powerful force, that when I come to meetings, when I am doing my spiritual program, when I'm staying connected to the 12 steps, that I stay connected to that powerful, positive force. And I don't have to understand it more than that. All I have to know is that I can carry that positive force within me and take it out and take it with me and be a beacon of hope for other people as long as I stay connected to my program. That positive force flows through us and around us, and I don't have to understand it. And actually, our speaker tonight, Sandy Beach, who's here today, he had a really great analogy that helped me a lot with that, and he talks about flying and just having faith that the beacon that brings you into land, that those instruments will guide you to where to go. You have faith, if you're going to follow that, it's going to put you down right where you were. Well, my husband was a private pilot at that time, and I knew that was true. I knew we had faith that if we were following those instruments, we would land right where those instruments said we would land. And I remember one time coming into the Santa Barbara airport, and we went right into a cloud bank that was all the way down to the ground, and we just had to have faith that when we got to the point where that instrument told us we were going to land, that our wheels were going to be on the ground, and it was true. It happened. So if I could have faith in a beacon of electricity, why couldn't I have faith in a higher power when I see its evidence every day working in my life? So, to me, I don't have to figure out what a higher power is. All I have to do is know that I see it acting in my life and other people's lives in this program every single day. The decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God was a relief to me. I didn't have to try to be God to other people anymore. I didn't have to try to run the world. I love the traditions because the traditions teach me how to do that. I'm a principal of a school. That requires me taking on a lot of responsibility. But today I don't have to feel like that responsibility is something that is mine alone to bear. Today I know that I'm a trusted servant at that school. I don't govern. I'm a trusted servant at that school. I go each day to make sure that I fulfill the trust that the people put in me to make sure that it runs well. That if I have to let someone go from a job, I can do it with love in my heart because I know that as a trusted servant to that community, that it's in the best interest of that community and the best interest of that person that they no longer be in that position. And I can do that with love in my heart. And I did have a secretary that said if she ever got fired, she hoped it was by me, because it's never a negative thing when you keep the program and the traditions in your heart and you keep that love there for people. The fourth step was important because I had to come to grips with myself as a human being. My denial had been great. I hadn't looked at myself all those years. My defects of character did not start with marrying the alcoholic. My defects of character, they were there out of the chute. 5 years old, I got kicked out of dance class because I was trying to tell the teacher how she should run that class. I was telling her I didn't think she had good enough control of the little kids in that class, and I was telling her she needed to get control of those kids because we were there to learn, not to be messing around, I took things seriously, I was intense, even as a 5-year-old, My character defects were not because of alcoholism. They were characteristics of me as a human being that became enlarged by living within the disease of alcoholism, by trying to make sense out of that alcoholic's nonsense. I got a little screwy myself. And so I needed to figure out what those character defects were so I could take opposite action. The 5th step was a real gift to me because in the 5th step, I got through my 5th step with my sponsor, and she said, "Well, is that all? Is that all you've done?" Well, I thought I was this really bad person, I thought I was really terrible. I thought I'd been out there just screwing up people's lives, I knew that Joe was really depressed when he got in here. I knew that my dad had committed suicide. I thought that it was me. That's the egotism that we bring into this program. I thought that because I was a bad person, I was making these other people want to commit suicide. That was that kind of powerful ego that brought me to my knees in this program. So doing that 4th step, figuring out who I was, doing the 5th step, having someone pray with me to help me help forget what I'd shared, unless she needed it to help me with something, that was a real gift because then I got to find out that I was just another human being. I was just a human being in this world among human beings, and it allowed me to be okay with other people. I've heard someone else share it allows us just to be another bozo on the bus, and I really love that. I don't have to be the driver. I don't have to be in charge. I don't have to be the map reader or the navigator. All I have to do is sit there and be another bozo on the bus with other people. And as soon as I could accept myself the way I was, I could accept you exactly as you were without getting into that judgmentalism that had been a big part of my characteristics. Let's see. The rest of the steps helped me to really clean up my side of the street and to let go of that past so I could stay in the present. And I really think that that's such an important gift of Alanon, is learning how to stay in the present, learning how to be in today. Because before I got here, I was either reliving the past and worrying about the past, or I'd be out in the future and trying to take charge of the future, just trying to figure out, well, as soon as I kill my husband, I'm going to wear this to the funeral, and then we're going to drive here, and then I'll be able to get this other house. I'd be having all these grandiose plans, and that was more real than what was taking place in the present. If I'm worrying about the future, it's usually not positive. If I'm thinking about the past, it's usually not positive. But if I can stay in the moment, I can stay positive and I can stay connected to my higher power, because right now, at this moment, each and every one of us is okay. Each and every one of us is in God's hands right now, and we're all feeling good, we're well fed, we're comfortable, unless we're just a little bit cold from the air conditioner, but we're all okay right now. If I can stay in the present, I am okay right this instant. So that was what those steps let me do. And then the 10th step is important to stay present. I don't believe in reworking all the steps all the time, but through my 10th step, I can do checks on how I'm doing at working my program. For a while, I felt like I was feeling that unease. Our higher power is inside of us, right? Because every time I'm doing something that is not what my higher power would want me to do, I feel uneasy. Do you guys know what I mean? That unease that you've screwed up. There's something that isn't wrong. Sometimes it'll take me a little while to figure out what it was that I did that wasn't right, because I'm not that attuned to myself. But if I pay attention to that inner voice that tells me something isn't right, I can usually figure out what it is that I need to work on. So for a while I have a little, one of those little calendars that has the days divided up, and I would divide it in half, and on one side I'd put a little happy face, and on the other side I'd put a little sad face, and each day I'd just write down a couple of words that described the things that I felt I'd really done well that day. I'd been kind to someone, I had taken time to listen, I'd done something and hadn't gotten found out. That's really hard for me. Those things from, one day at a time, that's the one I had the most trouble with. When I came in here, I didn't want to do something for someone not get found out. I didn't want to do something for fun and for free. I wanted to do something so you'd say thank you to me. And you'd be really grateful that I was your friend. It was all about me. Anyway, so I'd take this little piece of paper, I'd write down on the happy side, nice things I'd done. I'd put down on the sad things, those things I felt I could have done better, those things that weren't in God's will, that weren't what God would have had me do. And I was able to kind of track after a month or so those things that I really wasn't making the progress on that I felt I should have, so that I could take the contrary action, so I could force myself to take the actions that didn't come naturally to me. The 11th and 12th step, I do try to stay spiritually connected by attending meetings. I also do yoga. I know you can't both obsess and go to yoga at the same time. So if you are the kind of person like I am who tends to obsess on things, go to yoga. It'll help a lot, because there's no way you can move your body into positions like a pretzel and still be thinking about the problems in your life. But the staying in close contact with the meetings does allow the spirit of the sunshine of the Spirit to shine through, and allows me to work the 12th step. I don't have to go out and convince you to come to Alanon, because if I'm working my program, you will ask me what it is that I do that helps me to stay peaceful and serene, and then you will come to me. Now, the gifts of this program are many. I could really talk for a lot longer about how grateful I am to have this program in my life. One of the things that is so much better today is relationships with other people, because I don't depend on you to determine how I feel anymore. That sense of detachment is there. I told you about my daughter. Our relationship was like a plate of spaghetti. We were so entwined. Becoming detached from her has been probably the hardest thing that I've had to do. And I just want to share one little story that kind of shows how I did that. She graduated from college, then she went on to law school, and when she graduated from law school, she decided to take herself on a 2-week, or maybe it was more. She decided to go to Southeast Asia by herself. She didn't have anybody she particularly wanted to go with, so she just decided, I'll go by myself. So she goes over there, and she was going to write to us, on the email and stuff, but the problem was there weren't always emails available for her to use. So some days I wouldn't hear from her, and the way my Alanon brain works is I don't get an email from her. I start imagining all the things that could be happening to her in the back alleys of Vietnam or Cambodia or wherever she happened to be. And so my brain is like a terrier, yet chews on stuff, chew, 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 chew. Think, oh my God, she's been captured, she's being sold into white slavery, she's lying dead in an alley, people are being mean to her, I'll never see her again, oh poor me, what should I wear to the funeral? We won't have a funeral, no one will ever tell me, no one even knows where she is, I'll never find out what happened to her. It'll just be one of those things where I never hear from her again. That was the way my brain would go, So then she would email, hi Mom, everything's going fine, everybody's been really nice to me, I'm having a really good time, I took some great tours. And then I realized that all those bad things were only happening inside my head. So, since I have no control over what's happening to her in Vietnam, since I have no power over this, I might as well imagine good things happening, right? So, when I didn't hear for a few days, I'd start imagining her doing really happy things. Oh, she's taking some really good tours. She's having some good times. People are being nice to her. She's having a ball. I'd visualize all these great things. And then she'd call and everything would be fine again. That worked so well that I started using it even after she got back in the States, and I'd use it with other people, and I shared it with some of my teachers that were worried about their teenagers. Instead of imagining them in a wreck on a road, imagine them having a fabulous time, such a fabulous time with their friends that they forgot to call you to tell you that they've been late. It works. It all happens. Reality is just up here. So that to me was that detachment. I've had to practice it over and over again because, my daughter keeps throwing wrinkles in my path. She, after 4 years of being an attorney, she decided she didn't like being an attorney. It was too boring. So she quit and decided to become a full-time triathlete. Now, this is the rule that I've given myself. I can express an opinion once. I can tell her what I think of something, but then I have to let it go and let her do what she wants to do. So I told her, well, that sounds like a really chancy way to support yourself. I'm not supporting you anymore, so, good luck. I don't quite understand it, but if that's what you want to do, do it. Well, she had a great time. After a while, she figured maybe she wanted to work again, so she became a police officer. Now, police officer is not something I would have chosen for my daughter to do. I don't understand why she wants to be a police officer. She said it's the most fun job in the world. She loves it. She's been a police officer now for several years. I was able to give my opinion, and then I took it back, and then I'm supporting her. She decided to go out and buy a motorcycle as her only mode of transportation. I was able to give my opinion. I think that idea sucks. I don't like that idea, but, if that's what she wants to do, that's up to her. That's just the way that I have to have that level of detachment with someone that I love so much, who's so important to my life. With my husband, our relationship today is peaceful. I don't know if it's just because we're really old now, or if it's working this program. I suspect that it was because I was given some magic phrases by the women of this group, and one of them was, "You might be right." I cannot tell you that you cannot have a fight with someone who says you might be right. I use it in my work all the time too, because it worked so well with him. The first time I tried it on him, he was going, he gets going, he perseverates on ideas, I don't, maybe none of the rest of you have that experience, but that was mine, why do you always leave the cupboard door? I don't see why you always leave the cupboard doors open. Don't you know that it's not good to keep the cupboard doors open? And the first time I learned that, I just said, well, you might be right. He says, what do you mean I might be right? You know I'm not right. Anyway, now that all that one of us has to do is say that to the other, and we start laughing. We do have the gift of serenity in our relationship today, in our home. We love coming to conventions like this because each of us, there's something here for each of us. To help our program grow stronger. We go to speaker meetings together. It keeps us working the program together and keeps our home a happy home. Let's see. I know we need to get on to our business meeting, so let me just tell you what I see the program's gift is to all of us, and that is the learning theory that I shared that before, and it makes sense to me, and that's we come into this program with unconscious incompetence. We don't even know how sick we are. We're unconsciously incompetent, and as we start to become aware of what's taking place in our lives, we realize we come to a conscious incompetence. We understand what we don't know. And then with working the program, we get to a place of conscious competence where we can start living life like a mature human being, kind of. And I believe that we finally reach that maturity when we get to an unconscious competence, where we can be kind and good to other people without having to think about it, when we can have a decent relationship with another person without having to think about it. And that's what I hope for myself and for each and every one of you in this program, is that unconscious competence of working these 12 steps. Thank you for letting me share with you today.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.